Hello there, c.note here. Welcome to summer. There's birds outside. There's baby birds literally outside this window, so it might be some background noise. I apologize for that. My name is c.note, aka Christian Rivera. Welcome to DOPEamine. The show is mostly focused on INTPs, but I talk about growth, giving advice, support, all of that fun stuff. And really the original purpose of this channel, this podcast, was for me to express myself. A few years ago, in kind of mid-2017, I was trying to figure out a podcast or something I wanted to do, and I really felt like I was alone in my life, and I felt like I needed to start expressing myself. So I downloaded the app Anchor, and I created my own podcast, and I was just starting to record in between, before and after work and at lunch and things like that, just sharing thoughts and putting things out there. I was in a rough place, and I felt like I needed to do that. So in essence, this episode is kind of one of those kinds of things. I have some things that I want to share that hopefully can help you in your life. But in essence, it's about what is so helpful about continuing to explore your personality type. And in a way, like there are challenges that come from, I think a lot of us feel uncomfortable with uncertainty. Some of us feel more comfortable with uncertainty. Some even thrive in it. For me, as an Enneagram One, I've never really thrived in uncertainty. I always try to find some sort of answer to things. I'm always looking for, what is it, right? And then when I feel compelled, or when I feel like I have enough information, I can feel pretty set in it. It kind of locks in, and I'm like, okay, this is the thing. But I know as an INTP that things are always changing. And then there have been a million times where I felt certain about something, and then new information comes in and something changes. That can be about our personality type. That can be in the work that we do. That can be in our, careers, relationships, and just continuously noticing things, right? And that's just part of being alive, right? Like, this moment is this moment. The only thing that can maybe be certain is how I describe this moment. But the moment's gone. We're moving on. It's the next thing, right? So certainty is a tricky game. And, it's not lost on me that one of the most popular videos on my channel is about, I should say the most popular video on my channel as of this recording is called, Are You Really an INTP? And it's about the exploration and search and some answers as to what it's like to be an INTP for other INTPs to experience an INTP, which is me, and to learn from someone who's had experience meeting a bunch of other INTPs and having a YouTube channel where I talk to and talk about INTPs all the time. And, I still think that's better than taking a test. That's reading descriptions, getting to know other people, experiencing other INTPs, and getting to know the ways that we think, and also getting to know other personality types and the ways that they think, so that we can say, oh, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. For INTPs in particular, I think the best way to learn your personality type is to learn about other personality types, again, so that you can start to eliminate. That's really what we do better as INTPs, is eliminate versus select, right? Usually we select based on no more logic existing around why that thing could be the thing or not the thing, if that makes sense, right? So it's like you eliminate, the thing that's left is the thing. That's got to be it, right? But as we go through life, new information shows up, and suddenly this thing is called into question. That could be your identity, that could be your personality type, that could be sexuality, that could be your career, that could be your relationship, that could be your relationship to your humanity, that could be a spiritual relationship, religion, your family, any number of things, or even just theories, ideas about the universe, right? Like, what we understand about everything now is just what we understand about everything now. We just simply don't know that things could or could not change. And so one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is because I suspect that I'm actually a social one in the Enneagram and not a sexual one. Now, I'm not sure. I'm still exploring. But some things came to light for me. And which is funny because like over the last few podcasts and episodes, I was kind of dealing with the fallout of potentially being a sexual one. And I realized that I've had such a visceral reaction to that because I may actually be a social one and may be concerned with how that looks or how that feels or how that's perceived for someone's judgment of what it means to be a sexual one, having that cast onto me. So if you don't know much about Enneagram One or anything like that, there's a couple podcast episodes I've done recently kind of sharing some of my recent evolution up to this point. But really, one of the reasons I think I'm more of a social one versus a sexual one is like, first of all, I'm more so driven to kick on this camera and talk than I am to write in a journal or to, or to, do any of the other Enneagram type things. There's a long history of me trying to present myself as perfect in my own way as an INTP versus just being ragey. I've got plenty of ragey in me, and I've been that. I've done plenty of that on Twitter, actually. But over the course of my life, there's a lot of nodes that kind of lit up once I started to explore this. So the reasons that I got to this point is that I was listening to Enneagram 2.0 podcast with Aranio Paez and Beatrice Chestnut, and they did this podcast episode about mistypes when it comes to the Enneagram, and they got to Enneagram 1, and they said that social ones highly relate to fives, and I still very much highly relate to fives in terms of energy usage, valuing information, kind of being more of an intellectual type. I do enjoy learning, though I learn for necessity, like to execute on something or to do something. Fives tend to just want to learn for the sake of it, and fives have more of a scarcity relationship to energy, whereas I don't necessarily have that, but because I'm an INTP and a social one, possibly, I burn out my energy like real hot and real fast, right? Because of the impulse to be a social example, I'm willing to put myself out there or put myself on the highest perch that I can find. And all of that energy usage and all of that attention really burns me out really quickly. So realizing that was really interesting because then all these little things in my life kind of started to light up the same way that it did when I started to explore the sexual subtype. But I realized that as I explored the sexual subtype for Enneagram 1, that I was kind of ignoring the social subtype. It was almost like it kind of skirted under the radar. And once I started to look that up, I started to realize that this is even more prominent than more prominent and more unconscious and more under the surface. Even in little things like, when I get in my car or drive into my parking lot at home and it's like later at night, our parking lot is like adjacent to our building and there's apartments right there and there's usually windows open. And I like to listen to my music loud in the car. But when I pull up, I make sure I turn down the radio. I have all sorts of social considerations that I take into account to make sure that I'm demonstrating how I would like others to be. Like if somebody pulled up to my apartment window, I would love for them to turn it down and not be too loud and all these things, right? Again, it's subjective based on me and what I want to demonstrate as an example. One of the biggest nodes for me in my past is that in 2017, I went through a divorce and I was in San Diego for 7 years. I spent a long time there. And the reason I moved to San Diego, in retrospect, is that I wanted to elevate myself above my peer group in Philadelphia, where I'm from. So I moved to basically try to show that I'm moving forward, I'm moving on, I can create this vision of a life that looks perfect on the surface, right? As long as you don't get too close, it can look great. It's like the castle in the distance looks nice and shiny, but once you get close, you'll start to notice the blemishes. So I started to create this life elsewhere in San Diego. I found what I perceived to be the perfect wife and the perfect house and location and good job, and I worked in the film industry, and I did all these things that like looked really good on paper or looked really good for make me look good, based on my perception of those in my past. And I think that's been the hardest part for me to accept, is that I do very much care what other people think. That's been hard for me to admit with this channel. I do care what other INTPs think of me in terms of being an authority, or in terms of sharing my story or making an impact or anything like that. And then secondly, I started to realize that I have insecurities around a sense of authority, because in my past I've tried to manufacture a sense of authority in so many different situations. So instead of actually going and earning the credentials of something, I just found a way to sort of insert myself into a situation in which I become the expert in something, right? So in the case of, and I might be shooting myself in the foot here, but in the case of Myers-Briggs, I don't have any certifications, or the Enneagram, or I don't have any certifications, or mental health, I don't have any certifications. But the thing that's actually been different is that I've been able to talk about my story in relation to those things, and I think that does give me some sense of authority. But in other things that I've tried in the past, I've basically tried to insert myself into different industries, like trying to start my own businesses with no substance. I've tried to start a gaming company before. I've tried to start an art curation business. I've tried to start all sorts of different things where I would get really fascinated by creating the logo, the look, the vibe, but then there was no substance. As Molly calls it, there was no cheese in the mozzarella stick. And, and I noticed a pattern of me doing that over time. Like dopamine is the thing I've put the most time and effort and substance into, even though it's been, inconsistent by the standards of trying to like make money and stuff like that. It's consistent in it being a personal expression. And that's really what's allowed me to create new substance. So when I left in 2017, when I left my life and I changed everything, I'd kind of reached the peak of social perception, and I realized how much I was denying myself of what I actually wanted in terms of a relationship, a quality of life, jobs, like that sort of thing. Like everything was like coming to a head where I couldn't maintain the facade anymore. It's kind of like creating a cardboard cutout of the life that I want, but then like behind it is just, you can tell it's cardboard from within. And so when my partner Molly came along, and this opportunity to like live more of the life that I actually authentically wanted, and I had created enough distance socially from people who I was like concerned about the way that I was perceived, that I was able to just make the choice that I wanted for myself, which was to move to Rochester, New York, and to be with Molly, and to start really put more attention into dopamine and, personality type stuff, and do more of what I authentically wanted to do. So in a sense, my one-to-one instinct, or my instinct for my desires for what I actually wanted, overrode finally, my fear and concern of what things would look like if I had given into those things in the first place. I hope any of this is making some sort of sense. So this is just relative to my story, and that's all I can do is really share my story. But again, the reasons that I came across potentially being social one is that that podcast episode and just all of these stories starting to light up related to being a social one. So, social one is about perception. It's about looking like the perfect person. It's even like how that's translated into my life lately is like letting go of all of those image related things, right? So even just like having the background here as not as intense as I would probably want it, I'm just like letting it go, right? Not dressed up too much, or no script, just kind of like trying to, the camera clicked. I hope it's still good. We're still good. I'm no longer worried about perception as much as I used to be. Even when going out in public these days, I'm letting myself be a little bit more raggedy, whereas in the past I would dress pretty much like business casual everywhere. I was, trying to kind of fit into a men's style sort of archetype and demonstrate how other men should dress or look. And, I'm letting go of a lot of those things. So to reel it back into this idea of continuing to explore your personality type is that the exploration itself yields the rewards, not necessarily the certainty of it, right? So the exploration continues to have you say like, okay, I'm this thing, or this is the answer for now. And I think a lot of INTPs, we understand that as introverted thinkers. I think we understand that general idea of holding information or paradoxes or whatever for a long period of time. Another inspiration for this video has been the podcast episode that just came out from my friends at Personality Hacker about paradoxes of personality. I think it's called Personality and Paradoxes is the name of the episode. And with introverted thinking, we're holding information about something, about various things in this mosaic of understanding. And the challenge, and a challenge with a lot of introverts in general, is like having to pick one of those things to put out into the world, or a multitude of those things to put into a project, or to put into to work, or to have a sense of certainty about something. And the reason I'm focusing kind of on certainty is because it doesn't matter either way whether or not something is certain or uncertain. I'm trying to like get to know that for myself in a lot of ways. So it doesn't matter if I'm social dominant or sexual dominant when it comes to the Enneagram instincts. It's what those things are telling me or revealing about myself that are important, right? It doesn't matter if I have a certainty that I can go up to someone and say, yeah, I'm this, 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 and this. And there's nothing wrong with saying like, I'm still exploring this, or this is what I've learned from this possible exploration, as opposed to saying I'm this and that means that, right? And sometimes that's, the tricky thing about identity is like, I've done a recent episode on this channel about identity and INTPs, and, static identities or perceptions of static identities have been probably one of the most dangerous things in human history, or can escalate into those things. And I'm not saying that a collection of INTPs may become something dangerous, but it's the idea of being dynamic and fluid and ever growing and ever changing. So for me as a social dominant, it's like I'm potentially a social dominant. I'm learning new things all the time about myself, including that piece, the social piece. What does that mean? And I'm probably going to come across other systems that may tell me other things about myself. There's another system, I forget what it's actually called, but there's I think it's like I totally forgot what it's called, but it's about sort of like your method of achievement in a way. There's different types. It's like the mechanic, the archetype. If you probably just search for like mechanic and archetype, you can probably find it. But, I found that I'm the creator in that system. And that makes sense. I like to just make stuff. And with this social dominant discovery, I'm sort of realizing that my desire to be sort of the top of the social perch, to be above being human in a way, is preventing me from just making stuff. I just want to make what I want to make. Sometimes it's enabling me, but like in the past, I would be so fixated on creating the facade of something that when it came time to making the stuff, I wanted to move on and make other stuff. Instead of focusing on creating something and then letting that blossom into something that I could call something, that I could dress something around, right? So I basically, in a way, been doing something and doing it in reverse of my natural instinct. My natural instinct is to just make stuff. So something I'm testing right now is that I create these little, I don't have any examples around me, but I create these little abstract drawings that I want to put onto t-shirts. Like this is just my DOPEamine logo on the t-shirt, but in the future I just want to, put those abstract things on t-shirts. And I was telling Molly about it, and she's like, don't try to give it a name. Don't try to give a series the name or create a new website or do all that stuff, because that's just what's going to end up being distracting. You're going to be trying to make yourself, the best t-shirt maker instead of just making the thing, right? And I think that's what I'm working on for myself, is just trying to just make the damn thing that I want to make, and not trying to use the thing that I'm making as a way to increase my social clout, right? And it's not social clout in the same way that like I'm chasing likes and stuff like that. It's not that kind of thing. It's more so, it's more so authority. It's being seen as like the expert or the go-to person, right? So in a lot of ways, having this channel feels like a paradox of that. And I'm struggling with feeling whether or not it's okay to continue having this channel sometimes. I'm trying to figure out if that's been good for me, if that's actually good for you. I think that's been really helpful for people. So it's like, there are positives, I'm not trying to beat myself up about it. I'm not, my ego fixation or my super ego fixation is not something that's evil or anything like that. It's just something that's gotten in my own way. And I'm trying to find that balance of how do I actually use this thing in a focused, positive way that is helpful. I recently watched the movie Invictus, and Nelson Mandela is a social one. I think he's social self-pres, sexual repressed, and the movie was great, and I related to him as a personality, not necessarily his epicness in terms of what he did for recent history in the last 30 years, but in terms of his demonstration of how to behave, and setting the example, not necessarily going out there and trying to just like talk people into better behavior, but through a series of demonstrations, either through himself or the soccer team or the people that worked with him, and then creating this like chain reaction. That's in a lot of ways what I've wanted to do with DOPEamine. I kind of talked about reforming INTPs, but in a way that's I'm wanting to do it less in a way that's about talking, because I think I do like talking. I do like like sharing this stuff, but it's more about demonstrating and sharing this sort of vulnerable, more podcast episode kind of thing, is part of that demonstration. And a lot of the videos that I've talked about in terms of how to think about personality or how to explore your own personality is largely, in essence, trying to demonstrate a better approach to this sort of thing. I think recently I watched an interview between Sadhguru and Matthew McConaughey, which was an interesting conversation. And at one point, Sadhguru said that if you're more connected to being human, to being to your humanity, to others' humanity, to your connection to nature, understanding that your lungs are tied to trees and that you breathe what they take in and they breathe what you take in, and start to see this like system thinking symbiotic relationship with this stuff, then there's really no more need for the idea of morality or ethics or anything like that. That you simply become human. And I think that's something that I'm learning for myself as a one, is like how to be human. Molly and I have been watching, ironically, this series on Netflix called Human. It's about sort of like looking at the body as a system and understanding the different nodes in the human body system. And I realized that I'm not typically an anxious person, but I've recently noticed that I get anxious related to self-preservation things. So I'm self-preservation repressed in the Enneagram sequence. So repressed instinct basically means it's something that you don't really pay much attention to, consciously at least. And I'm trying to make that part of me more conscious. Like I'm trying to take care of my needs. I'm trying to drink water when I need to drink water. So I'm noticing that when I have a self-preservation need, whatever that may be, I start to build resentment in my brain. I start to feel kind of angry, and not in the kind of hangry way. It's because it's not just about hunger. It's like any self-preservation need, I start to feel irritable. And I realized while watching this series that I've had a history of feeling anxious or uncomfortable when watching anything related to the internals of the human body. And the series is fascinating, but I find myself being anxious the entire time, looking at the heart and blood vessels and the brain and the brain's connection to the heart and the brain's connection to the gut and the brain's connection to neurons and white blood cells, red blood cells, all of the, the digestive system, all of the things that make us a human being, an actual organic system. And I realized that part of my anxiety related to that is that as a one, I kind of have this super ego relationship to myself, in that being reminded that I'm human is actually a threat to my self-preservation. Or reminding myself that I'm human feels like a threat to my self-preservation. Because in my mind, I'm sort of like above the idea of being human. It sounds wild, it sounds narcissistic, it sounds crazy, but it's all unconscious. It's very Spock-like. Like Spock is a one, and he's a very self-preservation one, very controlled. It's about controlling himself for himself, and just it's not about necessarily for that character being perfect, like showing perfection, but it's like being logical, being perfect, being controlled, disciplined. And I think it was season 2 of Star Trek Discovery kind of explored younger Spock and all of that, like some push and pull there. And I related so much to that version of Spock, and to like, once I got to know that character a little bit more, I relate to so many of those things. So here's another way to think about it, I guess, to share. It's described in the Enneagram that, like, as we're sort of like essence in a way. It's like you can think of it as a soul or a spirit or whatever consciousness, whatever it is outside of this idea of a fleshy form, right? It's kind of like the Christian idea of falling from grace. Like, when you're born, you fall from heaven and to become a human and all of that stuff. And the Enneagram is like kind of depicting how far you've fallen. And for ones, the idea of a one is like you've fallen the furthest from God, in a sense, in a way that you yourself feel like you can do better than God. And by you, I mean me. And that's why ones are so fixated on what could be better, or what, perfection, quote unquote, right? It's always like, nothing is good enough. And for me, I've been learning to accept good enough in my work, in my relationship, in my dwelling, my new life. New, it's been around for 4 years, but it's still relatively new compared to the rest of my life. This like modern era of life is largely about accepting this good enough of everything. That doesn't mean it's low quality. It just means it's like, I can accept it and I can accept myself. There isn't something wrong or missing. There isn't something that could be better. There's always things that could be better, but it's like, it's not always my problem, and it shouldn't always be my problem. It's kind of like the idea of always noticing grammatical errors. It's like, you don't need to use that brain space all the time. Does it really matter? Ultimately, I don't think it matters. And it's not about nihilism either. It's just letting go. I think for me, it's like I'm learning to let go. So I kind of use this as an excuse to talk about myself a little bit, but it's really about why the continued exploration is so important. You know, there isn't a state of done. There isn't a beam me up moment, right? There isn't this state of personal growth where it's like, all right, you've ticked all the boxes. Now you're going to get sucked out of your body and you're going to go up to heaven or go up to a spaceship or whatever, right? Like, that's not the idea. You're done when you're dead. And you don't always have to be getting quote unquote better, but we use these systems to try to understand or even to forgive ourselves and to be able to just make the best choices that we can for ourselves. What's been helpful about continuing to explore this stuff for me is like, now I feel I do have a little bit of a sense of forward motion. I feel like I can now ask myself honestly, what do I want? Now that question's still really hard to answer, but now that I'm aware of my of my fixation or my focus on the idea of trying to build a facade, what can I do instead of that? Like, what do I want that isn't that? You know, even recently I went to a flea market and I was like, they're selling a lot of cool stuff here. I would love to sell my photos here. I'm like, no, don't get there. Just focus on taking photos. Focus on making art. Focus on, doing the thing. Make the cheese instead of just trying to make all this breading. Right? That's me and that's my story. And that's why that's all I could talk about. I can't tell you your story. You know that, and it's for you to explore. And that's the challenge as like a YouTuber that's doing Myers-Briggs and Enneagram and growth stuff, is I get a lot of questions of like, what do I do? I don't know either. I mean, I can help you. I help people with coaching and I listen and I try to provide suggestions, but it's ultimately up to you to experiment as to what works or what makes sense, or finding what the thing is right now and then continue to explore anyway. You know, as INTPs, the growth path, or at least one of the emergent, singular entry points into growth for an INTP is that exploration function, that extroverted intuition function. And that means knowing things and then going somewhere else or feeling like you know something and then having the humility to go somewhere else and then come back and say like, oh, maybe this isn't the thing. All right, well, that's not a measurement. That's not a judgment on my personal worth or my intelligence or whatever. It's just, I just didn't notice that other thing before. And now that makes sense that that's better than this thing, or that fits better than this thing. So when I was discovering my social dominant stuff, potentially social dominant stuff, I was embarrassed. I was like, I just put out all this content about possibly being a sexual one. And now I have to go on there and say that I'm not that. And I doubt anyone's really keeping track. It really doesn't matter. And I think I just wanted to flip it into something that is a demonstration of being willing to adapt and adjust and respond to emergent awareness within yourself, if that makes sense. So, yeah. So I don't know what else I have to say about it all. I hope this makes sense. I hope this is helpful in some sort of way, because I was just really talking about myself. But hopefully this is at least interesting. If you have questions informationally, because I know I just like made a bunch of leaps in terms of talking about instincts and Enneagram and stuff like that. If you need me to explain something, ask questions. Maybe I can put it into a video in the future. As for the future of DOPEamine, that's always a question that's up in the air. I'm always trying to figure out what I want to do if this is something that's getting in the way of doing some things that I want to do, or if it's actually helping. But one of the things I do want to focus on is productivity for INTPs. That's been like kind of my best selling thing on my course pages. And it's been helpful to so many people, some of the people that have signed up. And I'm really proud of that course in particular, because as I mentioned with like this picking the thing, or like some INTPs really thrive in that uncertainty place and want to keep learning and want to stay there. And, this productivity course helps you to kind of get your ideas out into the world in a way that's not betraying yourself, right? It's not about putting something out there and then therefore that negates all of the other thoughts that you have. You can hold multiple things at once. So I think it's unique to have a course about INTP productivity from an INTP who has been productive my entire life, and has put a lot of work into this channel and into these courses and stuff like that. So it's basically teaching you my ways. So if you're interested in that, let me know. If you have questions specifically about productivity and maybe some videos that I could do about that related to INTPs, I would love to be able to do that for you. So that's it in regards to this entire madness of a topic. I'm kind of feeling this anxiousness, this fear of judgment a little bit. But I know you guys are supportive. I appreciate you for being here, for listening to me talk, and for, being along on this ride with me. I really, really appreciate it. So DOPEintp.com. I am at Let's Go c.note on all the social channels. And that's really it. So with all the love in the world, take care of yourselves and each other. And I'll catch you next time on DOPEamine. I love you. Okay, bye-bye.